Russia's foreign minister has said that any ideas for peace in Ukraine that depart from those set out by Russia in talks in Istanbul in 2022 are hopeless. It comes after Russia launched one of the largest aerial attacks of the war so far on an American electronics factory in western Ukraine. President Zelensky has claimed that Russia is attempting to avoid the necessity of holding bilateral talks to reach a peace agreement. Earlier today, President Trump posted on Truth Social accusing Joe Biden of making it nearly impossible for Ukraine to defeat Russia because he had restricted Kyiv from launching cross-border strikes. Let's speak to William Courtney now, former Special Assistant to the President on Russia, Ukraine and Eurasia, and former US Ambassador to Kazakhstan and Georgia. Bill, good evening to you. Thank you for being with us.
Yes, Kate.
Let's talk about the various barbs today. From Donald Trump, first of all, suggesting it would be impossible for Ukraine to win the war without attacking Russia. It's not useful, that, is it?
Well, President Trump is likely correct on that point. It is very difficult to win a war if you fight only defensively on your own territory. So what we have seen Ukraine do very effectively is attack military targets and war-supporting industries throughout a wide range of western and southern Russia. And that seems to have thrown the Russians for a bit of a loop, actually. And I think, particularly, for example, in the oil sector, the Ukrainian attacks are actually having some specific impact, but they're certainly having impact on weapons production facilities.
Look, we've heard from Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister today, saying European proposals, and we're talking about security guarantees here, European proposals to deploy troops in Ukraine after a settlement, after a peace deal, would amount to foreign intervention. He called it absolutely acceptable for Russia. I mean, you know, again, we have to get our heads around that, don't we? Because we had Steve Witkoff, you know, talking about a breakthrough as game-changing, that Donald Trump had spoken to Vladimir Putin and accepted, or Putin had accepted, some sort of US security guarantees. Is European, whether it's boots on the ground, whatever support it is that the sticking point? Is that something the US can provide security guarantees, but no one else in the eyes of Russia?
It may be that there was let's say, misunderstanding in the Witkoff discussions in Moscow. Certainly, it's hard to imagine that Moscow would approve of the West providing specific security guarantees for Ukraine. But there's no reason why the West should be talking about this with Russia. Let's take two examples. NATO. Russia has no veto over how NATO deploys forces on its own territory. Another example, Korea. North Korea has no veto, no say in how the United Nations forces are deployed in South Korea. If there is a ceasefire at some point or some other end to the fighting, the Europeans, the United States, will probably have, let's say, coalition of the willing, putting ground forces in Ukraine as a reassurance force, hopefully closer to the front line than some of the Europeans are saying. And then also air power. The United States, for example, could supply air power for a no-fly zone over Ukrainian-controlled territory. There's no reason why the West should pay any attention to what Russia thinks about that.
But the issue is we still need to reach a peace agreement. European nations, we know, favour first and foremost a ceasefire deal to lead to lasting peace. Donald Trump is on the side of a peace agreement, something that he first seemed to be won over to the idea of after his meeting in Alaska with Vladimir Putin. Is that the wrong approach then? Are we saying that all this is in vain and we need to think about another way to bring an end to this war?
The Europeans are correct. Going for a ceasefire first is a sensible first step. Peace deals, which involve, for example, legal transfers of land often, those sometimes take years to negotiate. A ceasefire can be done much sooner. But with a ceasefire, the West, Ukraine, would not recognize legally that Russia controls or owns the Eastern Ukraine or Crimea. With a peace deal, what the Russians want is that Ukraine and the West would legally recognize Crimea and the eastern part of Ukraine it occupies as legally belonging to Russia. That's absolutely unacceptable for Ukraine. It would be unacceptable for the West as well. So a ceasefire is much more practical. Europeans are on the right track.
In a word or two, is it fair to say that Donald Trump's Ukraine peace initiative has now been thrown into disarray? Are we in a worse position again, or back to square one if square one is a week ago?
We're not really in a worse position, but we're pretty close to square one. Again, I think there was some misunderstandings about conversations in Russia. There may have been impressions in the Trump administration that those talks had gone better than they actually had. The basic Russian position, which is that Russia should control all of Ukraine, that Russia be able to slash the size of Ukraine's military forces, things like that. Those demands are just far beyond the amount of leverage that Russia has to achieve. Ukraine is fighting a pretty active and successful resistance so far. Russians have essentially been stalemated for 3.5 years now in eastern Ukraine.
Look, thank you for being with us. I do appreciate it. Bill Courtney there, former Special Assistant to the President on Russia, Ukraine and Eurasia, and former US Ambassador to Kazakhstan and Georgia. Good to have your company. Thank you.
Ceasefire, like a first element, stopping killing, and we agreed it and we supported him, and I think it was very strong idea, pushing Russia to real negotiations. And now we hear another signals. I think that we have to share all this with details and what Ursula said about and what we talked bilaterally and what we will talk now with all our coalition Williams, with all the Europeans. And we have to share all our thoughts with President Trump. We need the United States on our side. And I think that President Trump shared that we will need peace, but steps to this peace. We need, right, correct steps to have lasting peace. To stop Putin, it means not to make a pause in this war. Stop and have a lasting peace. Yeah, for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Та нет, не повний. Він оставляв там дивіться, щоб один був повний когось. Перед або за коліном. Хорошо. Наступне. Ап.